I'm sitting at the counsel table when a voice slices through the courtroom. My name is Victoria Hayes.
Don't stop the hearing. She's pretending.
For a second, I think I imagined it. Then I hear chairs creak as people turn toward me. My mother-in-law, Margaret Hayes, is standing in the gallery with one hand pointed directly at me. She doesn't look frightened. She looks inconvenienced, as though I've interrupted something important.
She always does this, she says loudly. The moment things stop going her way, she suddenly gets sick.
Even now, years later, I can still hear the certainty in her voice. Not anger, certainty. Michael doesn't tell her to stop. He rises beside his attorney instead.
She's delayed this divorce for months, Your Honor, he says with a tired sigh. Every hearing, there's another excuse.
I try to answer. I really do. Nothing comes out. A crushing weight settles across my chest so quickly that I can't decide whether it's pain or panic. I reach for the edge of the table, hoping I can steady myself before anyone notices. That thought still surprises me. I wasn't thinking about my heart. I was worried about embarrassing myself. The room tilts. Someone says my name. I can't tell who. The polished floor suddenly looks much closer than it should. Then my legs disappear beneath me. The last thing I see before everything blurs is Michael. He isn't rushing toward me. He isn't frightened. He just looks exhausted. Someone screams. A man from the second row pushes through the crowd.
I'm a cardiologist.
He kneels beside me, 2 fingers against my neck. His expression changes so quickly that even through the haze I notice it. He looks toward the judge.
Call an ambulance, right now.
The judge leans forward. Is it that serious?
If emergency services aren't already on their way, you're wasting precious minutes.
Everything begins moving at once. The bailiff reaches for his radio. People pull benches aside. Someone slides a folded jacket beneath my head. Voices overlap until they become impossible to separate.
Give her some room. Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with us.
Then another voice. Margaret. Oh. It's barely more than a whisper. I remember thinking I'd never heard uncertainty from her before. After that, nothing. Darkness arrived long before the ambulance did. 3 months earlier, if someone had told me this was where my marriage would end, I would have smiled politely. Not because Michael and I had a perfect life. We didn't. Looking back, I can see the cracks. At the time, I kept calling them ordinary. That's the dangerous thing about slow heartbreak. It rarely announces itself. It asks for one more excuse, one more chance, one more conversation tomorrow. My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm 52 years old. For 26 years, I served in the United States Army as a logistics officer assigned to medical units. People hear the word military and imagine helicopters, firefights, and medals pinned onto dress uniforms. My work happened mostly behind those moments. If surgeons needed blood before sunrise, someone had to make sure it arrived. If field hospitals ran low on antibiotics, someone had to solve that problem before anyone else even knew it existed. I loved that work because it taught me something simple. Stay calm. Verify the facts. Never sign paperwork you haven't read. I followed those rules almost every day of my career. I only wish I'd been as careful with my own life. I met Michael at Fort Belvoir when we were both still young enough to believe love solved most problems. He was patient. He listened. Or maybe that's simply how I remember him before everything became complicated. Sometimes, I still wonder exactly when that version of him disappeared. Or if I was the only one who ever believed he existed at all. For nearly 30 years, people said Michael and I fit together naturally. We finished each other's sentences. We never raised our voices in front of guests. Our home became the place where birthdays, summer barbecues, and holiday dinners somehow always ended up. We never had children. Life simply unfolded differently than we'd planned. It hurt for a while, then it became one of those quiet sorrows we stopped talking about. So we poured that love somewhere else. Our nieces and nephews knew they could raid our refrigerator without asking. The neighborhood kids called Michael the grill master. I was the one who always kept a basket of popsicles in the freezer because someone inevitably scraped a knee in our backyard. When I remember those years now, I don't remember the conversations first. I remember sunlight across the deck, smoke from the barbecue drifting into the trees, a family photograph hanging in the hallway that I stopped looking at long before I understood why. I retired from the Army first.
02 Michael worked another 3 years before leaving his communications contractor position. I thought retirement would finally give us the time we'd spent decades promising each other. Long breakfasts, weekend road trips, maybe a little cabin near the mountains. Instead, something else quietly took its place. Margaret. She'd always been part of our lives, but after Michael retired, her visits became constant. At first, she called before coming over. Then she started texting that she was already nearby. Eventually, the messages disappeared altogether. I'd hear the familiar click of the spare key turning in the front door. Even now, that sound can pull me back to those mornings. The lock would turn, the door would open, and before I even saw her, I'd feel my shoulders tighten. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Families have different boundaries. Besides, we'd given her that key years earlier for emergencies. I never imagined an emergency could slowly become every afternoon. She always arrived smiling, always carrying something. Fresh muffins, a casserole dish, groceries nobody had asked her to buy. It would have looked thoughtful to anyone watching. Sometimes I wonder if that made it harder to recognize what was happening. Margaret almost never argued directly. She preferred small comments that sounded harmless. If someone has to travel for work, I suppose it's easier when it's the wife. Or, Michael sacrificed an awful lot while you were chasing promotions. Then she'd smile as if she'd offered a compliment. I'd laugh, because arguing over remarks like that felt childish. I wish I hadn't laughed. Michael usually did. Not loudly. Just a quiet chuckle before changing the subject. It's strange what stays with you. Out of nearly 30 years together, one of the memories I can't shake is that laugh. Because I didn't hear agreement then, I hear it now. The changes were so gradual I kept finding explanations for them. Retirement is stressful. People need time to adjust. We're both learning how to slow down. Those excuses felt reasonable, until I noticed something I couldn't quite explain. Whenever Michael and I disagreed about anything, Margaret somehow appeared. If I suggested replacing our aging roof before winter, Margaret thought we should wait. Michael agreed. When I planned a reunion with friends from my old unit, she reminded him that married couples shouldn't spend weekends apart. He canceled our reservation before asking how I felt. I remember staring at the confirmation email on my phone for a long time. Not because of the trip, because it was the first time I realized a decision about my life had been made without me. Even then, I defended him. I told myself he was caught in the middle. I wanted to believe that. Looking back now, I think hope can be just as blinding as fear. Around that same time, something inside my own body began changing. The exhaustion came first. I blamed retirement, then age, then poor sleep. There was always another explanation, always another tomorrow. I didn't know yet that my heart had already begun trying to tell me a story. No one, not even I, was willing to hear. The first time I mentioned the exhaustion to Michael, he barely looked up from his phone. "You've been under a lot of stress." That was all he said. I remember standing in the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee. One was mine, the other was his. Mine eventually went cold because I kept waiting for him to ask another question. He never did. A few days later, the pressure across my chest returned while I was carrying a basket of laundry upstairs. It wasn't sharp. It was heavy, as though someone had quietly placed a weight against my ribs. I sat on the top step until it passed.
When Margaret came over that afternoon, Michael mentioned I'd been feeling tired. She smiled sympathetically. Retirement does strange things to people. Then she looked at me. If you spend enough time thinking about your health, eventually you'll convince yourself something's wrong. I laughed. I actually laughed. Even now, that memory embarrasses me. I had spent 26 years reminding soldiers not to ignore symptoms. Yet somehow I let two people convince me that my own body couldn't be trusted. I told myself I'd make an appointment after Thanksgiving, then after Christmas, then after New Year's. There always seemed to be another reason to wait, or maybe another excuse. Not long after that, I walked into the kitchen one rainy Saturday morning and found Michael already sitting at the table. Several folders were neatly stacked in front of him. The coffee pot had just finished brewing. The smell filled the room, but neither of us reached for a cup. "There you are," he said. "I was hoping we could get this taken care of today." He slid a stack of documents toward me.
Our financial advisor recommended moving some retirement investments. I opened the first page. Most of the language looked familiar. Military logistics had taught me to read paperwork carefully. Dates, account numbers, authorization forms. Little details mattered. Several account numbers didn't look familiar. Neither did the names of two investment funds. I frowned. I don't remember opening these. They're new. When? A couple of months ago. I looked back down at the papers. I honestly wondered if I'd forgotten something. Retirement had been busy. Maybe we'd discussed it. Maybe I'd simply missed the conversation. I wanted that explanation to be true. "Why wasn't I there?" I asked quietly. Michael rubbed his forehead. "Victoria, does every discussion have to feel like an investigation?" His words caught me off guard. I was only asking. "You don't trust me." I remember staring at him, not because I knew he was lying, because I couldn't understand how asking questions had suddenly become an accusation. For nearly 30 years we'd made decisions together, or at least I believed we had. "I'm not refusing to sign," I said. "I just want to understand what I'm signing." Before either of us spoke again, I heard it, the familiar click, metal turning inside the front door lock. Even now that sound instantly takes me back to that morning. Margaret walked inside carrying grocery bags as though she lived there. "Oh," she said after noticing the paperwork. "Am I interrupting?" Michael gave a tired little laugh. "Victoria thinks I'm trying to steal from her." I looked at him so quickly my neck actually hurt. "I never said that." Margaret slowly placed the groceries on the counter. "Then why won't you sign?" "I haven't finished reading everything." She folded her arms. "You spent too many years giving orders." I stayed quiet. There are moments in life when you know responding won't change anything. This was one of them. She smiled before speaking again. It was a smile I'd seen dozens of times. I've never forgotten it. "Marriage isn't the army," she said softly. "You don't have to question every decision." Michael chuckled, just once, quietly. That laugh stayed with me far longer than her words ever did. At the time, I told myself he was only trying to ease the tension. Looking back, I think that was the morning I stopped feeling like his wife and started feeling like an obstacle. I gathered the papers into a folder instead of signing them. "I'll read everything first." For just a second, nobody spoke. Margaret looked disappointed. Michael looked tired. At least, that's how I understood his expression then. Now I'm not so sure. I drove across town that afternoon to meet my oldest friend, Susan Parker. We'd met as young Army captains more than 25 years earlier, and somehow stayed friends through deployments, promotions, and enough military coffee to keep an entire brigade awake. The moment I walked into the cafe, her smile faded. "You don't look like yourself." I laughed automatically. That's not exactly the welcome I expected. "I'm serious." She waited until I sat down. "You were out of breath walking from the parking lot." I frowned. "I was? You didn't notice?" Honestly, I hadn't. Looking back, that's one of the hardest things to admit.
My body had been asking me to slow down long before I ever listened. "I've just been tired," I said. Susan didn't answer right away. She stirred her coffee, watching me over the rim of the mug. "When was your last physical?" "I'll schedule one." "When?" "Soon." She gave me a look I'd seen years earlier whenever a young lieutenant insisted an injury was nothing. "I've known you too long to believe soon." I looked down at my untouched coffee, steam still curled from the cup. Mine would be cold before I drank it. Somehow that tiny detail has stayed with me longer than most of the conversation. "You spent 26 years making sure everyone else received medical care," Susan said quietly. "But when it's you—" I smiled, though it didn't feel natural. "I guess I'm not very good at taking my own advice." "No," she replied gently. "You're terrible at it." Before we left, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Promise me." I promise. I meant every word. I simply believed I had more time than I actually did. The weeks that followed became strangely quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. Michael started taking phone calls outside. Whenever I walked into his study, his laptop screen disappeared before I could see it. One evening, I carried in a book he'd left on the coffee table. The computer snapped shut so quickly it startled both of us. "What are you working on?" I asked. "Consulting." "I thought you retired." "I did." "So, who's the client?" "It's confidential." The answer didn't make much sense. I remember standing there for another second, waiting for him to smile and explain. He never did. I walked away. I wish I hadn't. Not because I think he would have told me the truth, because that was one of the last times I ignored the feeling in my stomach telling me something wasn't right. Then the certified letters started arriving. Most were addressed to both of us. Almost every time Michael reached the mailbox first. "I'll take care of it. It's nothing important." I accepted those answers far more often than I should have. Until one afternoon when he wasn't home. The mail carrier handed me an envelope and asked for my signature. I opened it, standing right there in the hallway. Halfway through the first page, I felt my heartbeat quicken. A large withdrawal had already been requested from one of our joint retirement accounts. The authorization form included my signature. Except, it wasn't mine. At first glance, it looked convincing. The same looping letters, the same initials. But after signing military documents almost every day for 26 years, I knew my own handwriting the way musicians know their favorite song. Someone had copied it. Poorly. I read the page again, then a third time. I kept hoping I'd misunderstood something. I hadn't. For several minutes, I simply stood in the hallway holding those papers while rain tapped softly against the front window. I remember looking toward our wedding photograph hanging above the staircase. I couldn't make myself look at it for more than a second. I still didn't know exactly what Michael had done. I only knew the life I'd trusted for nearly 30 years suddenly felt unfamiliar. And for the first time, I was afraid the paperwork wasn't the real problem. It was only the first thing I had managed to see. When I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, I didn't speak immediately. Michael came home an hour later carrying groceries. I remember the sound of the bags hitting the counter before he even saw my face. Something in the air shifted the moment his eyes landed on the paper. He didn't ask what it was. He already knew. That realization still unsettles me when I think about it. "I can explain," he said quickly. I remember how automatic it sounded. Not careful, not honest, just prepared. "Please do," I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded calmer than I felt. He exhaled slowly, like he was choosing each word. "It was temporary." I looked at him. What was temporary? The transfer. The word didn't make sense at first. I remember waiting for him to continue, because part of me still believed there would be a reasonable explanation. "You signed my name," I said quietly. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Silence. Not dramatic silence, just empty silence that stretched too long to be comfortable. Something in me shifted then. Not anger. Not yet. Something heavier. Understanding trying to form but not fully arriving. Before he could answer, I heard the front door open. No knock, no hesitation. Margaret walked in carrying a covered dish, as if the conversation didn't matter at all. Her eyes moved from me to Michael, then to the papers. What is this now? Michael spoke first. She found the withdrawal notice. Margaret sighed like she had been carrying this burden all day. Oh, honestly. That was all she said at first. I still remember how small that word made everything feel. Honestly. As if this was something tedious, not something irreversible. I held up the document. This is my signature. She barely glanced at it. That doesn't prove anything. I looked at her. For a moment, I didn't understand what she meant. It's my account, I said. It involves a husband trying to manage things without being interrogated, she replied. I remember the exact pause after that sentence. The way the room didn't move. The way Michael didn't correct her. That silence told me more than anything else had. I turned to him. Did you tell her everything? He didn't answer. Not yes, not no. Nothing. And in that nothing, something inside me finally stopped trying to protect what was left of the story I had believed in. I can't do this, Michael said suddenly. His voice was lower now, tired in a way I didn't recognize. I can't live like this anymore. I remember blinking, not understanding the direction this had taken. What are you saying? He didn't look at me when he answered. I've hired an attorney. The words didn't register immediately. Then they did. I've filed for divorce. For a moment, I couldn't find air in the room. Not because I was crying. I wasn't. I was trying to locate the version of my life where this sentence made sense.
There isn't an us anymore, he added. That line stayed with me longer than anything else. Because it wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It sounded decided. Final. I sat down because I didn't trust my legs. Not because I collapsed. Because I didn't want anyone to see I was unsure how to stand anymore. And in that moment, I didn't think about the marriage ending. I thought about something else. Every decision I had been excluded from. The accounts, the signatures, the conversations that were no longer conversations, only outcomes. I didn't realize then that this was not the end of something. It was the beginning of everything I hadn't seen yet. I don't remember the exact moment the room stopped feeling like a courtroom and started feeling like something else entirely. Maybe it was when the doctor's voice cut through the noise again, sharper this time. Or maybe it was when I realized I was no longer hearing individual words, just pressure, movement, urgency. Someone kept calling my name. Not loudly at first, then closer. Ma'am, stay with me. I wanted to answer properly. I remember thinking that was ridiculous, that of all moments this wasn't the one where I should be losing control of my own body. But my lungs didn't agree. Every breath felt delayed, like it had to negotiate its way in. The last thing I clearly saw was the ceiling lights, too bright, too clean. I remember noticing that detail for no reason at all, like my mind had chosen something ordinary to focus on while everything else collapsed. Then there was motion beneath me. A stretcher, I think. Hands adjusting something near my shoulder. A voice telling someone to clear a path. The sound of shoes rushing across polished floor. And through all of it, silence from Michael. Not complete silence. I remember him saying something once, but I can't remember the words. What stayed with me was the tone. Controlled. Careful. Like he was speaking in a room he didn't want to disturb. I wish I could say I understood everything in that moment. I didn't. I was still holding on to the idea that this was just another medical episode, something temporary, something inconvenient. That belief lasted until I heard my attorney, Patricia. Her voice cracked when she said my name again, closer this time, as if she'd followed me into that space between awareness and blackout.
"Victoria, don't you dare! Stay with us!" I remember wanting to tell her I wasn't going anywhere. It sounded simple in my head, but nothing came out except a shallow exhale. And then I heard it. Footsteps that didn't match the rest. Slower. Hesitant. Margaret. She didn't speak at first. I think she was standing near the aisle, but I couldn't turn my head to confirm it. I only heard her breathe. A small, uneven sound I had never associated with her before. "Oh," she said again. But this time it didn't sound dismissive. It sounded like she was seeing something she hadn't prepared for. After that, everything became fragments. A door opening somewhere far away. Someone saying, "Ambulance incoming." The judge asking if proceedings should be suspended, as if the word proceedings still belonged in the same world I was in. It didn't. Then darkness, not sudden, not dramatic. More like something slowly closing its hand around everything I could still hold on to. I came back in pieces, not in the courtroom, not at first. I remember white walls, the smell of disinfectant that felt too sharp for my lungs. The beeping sound beside me, steady enough that I didn't immediately understand it was mine. My right hand was cold. Someone had wrapped it in something warm earlier and it had already faded. For a long time, I didn't open my eyes fully. I wasn't afraid, I was just tired in a way I didn't have a name for. A voice spoke nearby. "She's awake." Another pause. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I tried to nod. I think I did. It didn't feel like much of a movement. Slowly, the room came into focus. A hospital ceiling. A chair pulled too close to the bed. Papers on a tray table I couldn't read from that angle. Then Patricia again, sitting forward like she hadn't moved in hours. "You scared the entire courthouse," she said quietly. I almost laughed at that. Almost. But it turned into a breath instead. "Michael?" I asked, before I could stop myself. Patricia hesitated. That hesitation told me more than an answer would have. "He left with his attorney," she said carefully, "after you were transported." I stared at the ceiling again. I remember thinking that sounded like something that happens to someone else. Not the ending of almost 30 years, just logistics. People moving from one place to another. Then she added something softer. "Your mother-in-law stayed for a while." That surprised me more than anything else. "She didn't speak much," Patricia continued. "Just stood there until the room cleared." I tried to picture it. Margaret without a sentence ready, without control of the moment. It didn't fit easily. Time passed in uneven stretches after that. Nurses came in and out. Someone mentioned test results, but I only caught fragments. Cardiac strain, stress event, follow-up required. No one used the word collapse out loud, but I kept hearing it anyway. At some point, Susan arrived. I remember her sitting down without asking permission, like she'd decided the room needed her there more than I needed space. She didn't say, "I told you so." She never does. Instead, she just looked at me for a long time and said, "You're still here. That's what matters." But even then, I wasn't sure what "here" meant anymore. Because somewhere between the courtroom and this bed, something had shifted, not just in my body, in what I believed about all of them. And I wasn't ready to name it yet.